New to Dynasty and also a new Dynasty off season, that and more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, we a lot of times talk about the savvy veteran Dynasty GMs out there, but also there's plenty of folks starting their first startup draft ever, could be coming from redraft, salary cap, a variety of different formats. We're going to focus on some of the keys if you're just starting out, or good reminders for everyone here starting out with their Dynasty teams.
Yeah, this is the time to get cranking up playing Dynasty, right? If you are in a redraft league and you miss it, right, Dynasty's for you. And that's how I started Dynasty. I'm sure, that's how a lot of folks start Dynasty as well. So, I mean, that's the thing. I think the biggest thing is, right, you're going to be familiar with the players. You're going to sort of be familiar with a lot of the players. You're going to go deeper probably in Dynasty than you would in your regular redraft league. I think the key thing to understand is the rules, right? Just to start with that, really understand the impact that it has, right? That there's a lot of changes when you go into playing Dynasty that are different from your standard redraft league. So really understanding them, spending some time doing them, and thinking about them, I think is really important before you even start drafting.
Yeah, I think the variety of formats in Dynasty is greater than in redraft for sure, because you might mix in super flex, but I don't know about you, Jordan, but we don't see many formats, and let's discount some of these massive Scott Fishbowl or some of these aberrational type contests or big formats. Where when do you see in your typical office league or family league or on one of these big box platforms with point per carry, with start to tight end or premium scoring to a high degree, things like point per target, starting 11, 12 guys on offense, some of these formats, in Dynasty, or starting and having college players, you have a variety of things that you start throwing together, and it's a pretty unique experience and a big transition. Even if you play, and this is actually, for example, this topic is from a question. So shout out to Ezra, who emailed us between the week. And this is the perfect time of year to talk about getting into Dynasty, because redraft, whether you won, whether you lost, it's 4-6 weeks ago. And now you have the long wait, winter, spring, and summer, to get into August and September, where you're thinking about redraft again. And frankly, salary cap or low level keeper, you're keeping a few guys. Dynasty is forever. And I think you mentioned format, but I would also say the ramifications of your decisions are elevated in Dynasty. You don't get the reset in December, January, that every player you draft or every player that you acquire, the only way you're not going to have them in the future is by cutting them or trading them. They will be on your roster outside of inertia, means that they are there until an outside force, you act on that player.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with that, right, player profiles become really important, right? To understand, what makes a good player, right? What makes a safe player, what makes a risky player, right? Understanding all of those things is really important. So one of the things that you see is, right, prior success has a different impact at different positions, right? It's really important at quarterback. It's probably less so at running back. It's pretty important as well as at wide receiver and tight end, right? Those things really matter. Draft pedigree, right? Those things really matter. It matters differently to different positions, but generally the higher someone's drafted, the better they're going to be, right? Understanding all of those things, and then, creating by sort of understanding all of those things, you create some things to look for in your draft, some things to avoid. Really, I think the biggest value is it's really tough to pick between players, but if you can just know, like, hey, there's 10 or 20% of players in a round that I'm just going to avoid because I know that they're bad profiles, you're instantly going to raise the quality of your team because you're avoiding the bad bets, right? So I think kind of understanding the ramifications and understanding what makes a good dynasty profile, which versus what makes a risky one.
Yeah, I would say the other two aspects that are unique is and kind of a fingerprint to who you're going to be having your dynasty team is number one, how do you approach age? And it might just sound, well, this guy's 25, this guy's 29. There's more to it than that. There's more nuance based on each position. There's also more nuance to how much production do you have at said age, insulation of things like contracts versus, those age parameters. So there's a lot that goes into that, but these are easily identifiable as, put different dynasty teams and GMs into buckets. It's how do you react to age? And then the other part is how do you manage your own war room for a rookie draft? And again, you have those picks going sometimes 1 to 2 years out already. So you see some teams trade them early. You see some teams that never trade them and pretty much try to acquire as many as possible. And you see a variety of things in the middle of that spectrum. But those two things are unique aspects where you're not really, you might be looking at, typically running backs drop off at this age, and that maybe in the redraft, you're more concerned and you avoid players like that or what have you. But you don't really have the impact of, I'm drafting a player now at 25. What kind of lens am I looking at, or what type of lens do I want to look at into the future with redraft versus dynasty? So that's one big thing. And then the other part is there are really no rookie picks or future picks in redraft. It's all centered on this year. And frankly, you don't see a lot of trading. So I would add a third curveball to that one, Jordan, which is trading in general in redraft is so much the ancillary importance. I would say it's behind the waiver wire in terms of what I see people do. The draft is important, the lineups, of course, but the waiver wire, it's typically not a deeper format. And then trading is like, I sometimes go months or maybe a whole year. You don't really see trading much at all. If it is allowed, a lot of people don't even know where to start with that. And in Dynasty, that is a huge aspect of team building and team maintenance is making trades.
Yeah, it makes trading a lot more fun. Right. Even in, I've got some shallower keeper league, which is my home league. And it's really tough to make a deal because there's just not that many players that are that important. Right. It's just a lot more difficult to make deals in those leagues. In Dynasty, right, there's always a market to be made. Right. There's always a team that's not competing and a team that is competing, and they can have very matchable interest in terms of their rosters, right? In terms of what they're willing to trade and what they want to trade and what they're looking for. So those things make it a lot of fun. Again, and I think taking the long view, right? And this is like a great time of year. Like I love this time of the season because you can take this time and look at some strategies, right? You can look at some different things and try and, from a higher level, improve your team beyond just saying, hey, I want to pick players better. Right. And that's I think the most fun part of Dynasty is the different strategies that you can see, different ways to optimize your roster, different ways to get an advantage in terms of picks and all of those other things, right? All of those things that you can really run up the score on beyond just picking players, right? It's all magnified in Dynasty, which is great. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a format that it can be a little bit daunting if you first jump into it and haven't, and have never played it. But then you'll find yourself going and you'll be in one league, and then you'll be in two, and then you'll be in 4, 8, 16. You're gonna start learning
like
how numbers grow exponentially pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, and what I like about Dynasty is there's always another game. Because in redraft, let's face it, you get to midseason, and you kind of alluded to this. You get to midseason and you're done. Stick a fork. And in Dynasty, you can have a team that fell out of it. But you know what they're looking at? Week 1. They're looking at Y+1.
Yep.
They're looking at my next most meaningful game. I say that phrase probably 5 times a month on this show and other platforms. I mean, that what's your next most important game? And even if your season is going poorly, you're still looking ahead to week 1 of the following year. And it's going to be with your horses and your team and your players that you currently have in a large part, unless outside forces act upon it. So that's really where it's fun. November in a redraft league sometimes isn't totally fun. Oh, Larry fell out of the race. I don't know where he is. You got Joe. He hasn't set his lineup in 2 weeks. Like all of a sudden it becomes half the league is quasi interested, 2 or 3 people are really interested, and 1 or 2 people. I mean, they would have that on the league, and their 8-man or 10-man league. Like that was always kind of the running thing, right? Like so and so's out of it. And it's just like, if you had no stakes for being the worst team in the league, that what are they here for? It's just like, those out of towners, the long distance drafters, they're out of it. But it's just like in Dynasty, no, like those are teams in the running for maybe 101 this year. Those are teams that are, looking to maybe make trades for the following year, and they could help contenders. So there's a really great marketplace and dialogue for everybody within the Dynasty league, whether you're having a down year or a great year.
Yeah. One other thing too is when you're looking at making trades, it can be complicated, right? There's more factors going into it. There's picks. You might not know how to value them. Don't be intimidated by trading, right? Don't be scared to do it. The more you are doing it, the better you get, right? So that's why I do advocate, if you're getting into a league, adopting a team you can get a dollar orphan right now in a league, just to sort of fill a spot and use that as a way to learn how to trade, right? I mean, that's invaluable, right? That's a great way to learn how to trade. That would be, I think, the biggest hurdle a lot of people say is I just don't know how to I don't know how to value trades. So doing it more, it's one of the most fun things. Actually, when you ask people, one of the more enjoyable things that they say is almost on par with winning is trading, right? And so that has a whole nother we could do a whole show on that topic just alone, but right, it becomes a whole other game in and of itself than just trying to pick players. So, being comfortable with it takes some time, but don't be intimidated by it. And, you can use a lot of different techniques to do it.
And I would say use it as an experimental ground. For anyone that has a scientific background, you just know hypothesis and testing results. And you can read all you want. You can listen to every single podcast out there. You can go and look at some dynasty leagues, but until you have a team and until the decisions are yours, then you really have no stake in it. Until you and that's why I always say, start out, with whatever entry fee makes you comfortable. If it's a low level number, that's fine. But here's what you need to do though. You need to go in there and realize Jordan's been there, I've been there. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I always have the approach of every single year, you should look back. And I'm just going to use this from the Dynasty GM prism, but you should look back and say, what the heck was I doing last year? Whether that's certain trades, certain picks that you made in a draft, just your process. There should be a few things where you go, I was a dope. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It means you're growing. It means you're learning. It means you are improving from your knowledge base, your setup, your approach, and your execution now versus even 12 months ago, and especially 5 years ago. And if you get long and gray enough in this fantasy sport, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that you should learn, reiterate, and keep on improving. And so that should really lower the pressure on your first dynasty league. We can all remember these graphic, harrowing stories of bad picks, bad process, bad trades. But you know what? When the sample size grows, that's going to be a testing environment, a hypothesis that you had that did not work out. And it could have been horrific, in terms of what the setup to that. And you're like, I would never do that again. Great. You learned. That's kind of like, you run over the mailbox when you get your driver's license, right? Right. That might be the only mailbox you ever run over. And it was when you were 16.
Let's hope.
Okay. It was low stakes. Low stakes. You ran over a mailbox and not a pedestrian. Learning lesson. And the object wasn't even moving. Okay. So that's the idea, though. You just need to get in there and get your feet wet. If it's a new format, if it's just dynasty, compared to redraft, you won't know until you get in there and actually do a full season and off season in that new environment.
Yeah, I love it. Love it for sure.
All right. I got one other thing, because Ezra had a specific question. So I did want to mix this in. It's more of a draft question than a trade question. So he said it's 16 teams. So good on you, Ezra. 16 teamer to start out.
Like
One quarterback, and he was at 103. So his mindset was, he keeps hearing us talk. So is that an elite quarterback at 103? He was talking about, is Mahomes going to be there? Should I take him? Dynasty is forever. And he was just, he wanted to ask, A, when we're talking about Dynasty generally, is there a stock format? And then specific to his question here.
Yeah, so I think the stock format has historically been one quarterback, and it has been. If I were to sort of describe a stock league, it'd be one quarterback. It would be PPR, right? It'd be a couple of running backs, a couple of wide receivers, a couple of flex spots. Pretty standard scoring. It might have a kicker defense. It might not. I probably, and I think you and I together when we talk, I think our kind of default discussion revolves a lot around Superflex. Would sort of be, that's because that has become in recent years, we'll say the last 3 to 5 years, has been very much the predominant way that Dynasty's played. It's not you can still find one quarterback leagues, but it has become much more common than it was, and I would say it's the majority way it's played now. So I think a lot of times when we talk, that's the way you talk. That's the way you think about it. So if you hear us talking about elite quarterbacks at the top of a draft, we are talking about super flex drafts. Adam Harstead has. So if you're new to Dynasty, go. Adam Harstead's one of our writers, and go make sure you check him out because he's got a lot of good strategic stuff. But he has been talking a lot about Mahomes as being worth a first round startup pick and start one quarterback. And I saw some recent data that suggested that is actually occurring. And when you start looking at the longevity of these guys, would you rather take, a 27-year-old running back, or would you rather take Mahomes, right? Like, the longevity bet's actually the Mahomes side, so, but it becomes a little bit of there a lot in start one, you become very, the quarterbacks quickly become more replaceable, right? The difference between them isn't as big when you're playing in super flex, right? The difference between replaceability, right? To get someone to actually put in your lineup becomes a lot harder because there's so many more guys rostered and the like. So that's kind of the general difference. And then in a 16 team league, though, it becomes not the same as Superflex, but it becomes, having a good quarterback is a major advantage. It is an advantage. It's not the same thing, but it is an advantage to have one of the elite guys. If I was up that high, I'd probably be looking Jefferson, Chase, would sort of be up at the top of that board for me. And then, if you want to go running back, how you feel about Taylor or Breece Hall is in that conversation. I think probably be before I'd go Mahomes, but it's not a crazy idea to have Mahomes in the first round. I don't think that's a bad bet, especially when some of the running backs are getting older and the receivers kind of blend together, right? I don't think it's a horrible idea.
Yeah, I love what you said about just about the replaceability factor of quarterback. That's one thing that if you played in a 12-team redraft, you see with one quarterback what that is, which is viable guys off the waiver wire. And it's not quite that extreme in Dynasty, but the point is you can get to round 10 in a one quarterback, around 12, and still get a guy that can put up in a lot of these scoring systems 20 plus points. He still has probably a multi-year window of being a starter. So you have a lot of avenues of, like, even if you don't get your first quarterback right, or something graphically happens, you still have plenty of outs later, whether it's trading or even in that same startup draft. So yeah, I was kind of, my joke in one quarterback startups, and I'm so unfamiliar, Jordan. I mean, we do so many formats that are divergent from that. But I was like, in round one, I kind of wrapped my brain around it. I was like, okay, Jefferson, Chase, and I wouldn't take a running back. I was like, what else is there? I was like, if I don't get one of those two wide receivers, I would be like, I don't think it's a very good value decision, like staying there. So I was kind of wondering, as you were talking, I was like, at 103, what do you think the odds are that you get a look at Jefferson or Chase at 3? Pretty good. What's your spidey sense? Who goes more predictably in the top 2?
I would imagine it's those guys. I would imagine it's a minority of the time that it happens. I'd imagine it goes wide receiver early quite a bit, because the top running back isn't like in a great situation
figurehead right now, right?
Yeah, because I mean, you have Breece Hall coming off an injury. You got Jonathan Taylor coming off an injury, so that depresses their price a bit. It's funny because in Dynasty, the only time people the people love running backs coming off of a great season, but that's all subject to variance. And when they're the best bets when they're coming off of injuries, because you're getting a discount that they could actually overperform. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's a funny, and that's kind of what you're experiencing at the top of the board right now. So I would imagine like it's probably a running back one conversation primarily. I mean, again, trade down makes a lot of sense, right? If you can do that, if someone's in love with the running back up there. But I'd lean wide receiver early. And then again, I think you and I have had this conversation at different points. I don't think there's a clear wide receiver 3. I think there's like 10 guys. 10s might be a big number. 6, 7, 8 guys that you could have plausible cases for up there. And yeah, you could put them in like one of those Yahtzee die things that just cast the dice and pull them out any particular way. And I don't think it's particularly objectionable. So, yeah, I mean, I'd probably lean running back if I'm sitting there and Jefferson and Chase are gone, just because I think they're the most scarce guys. So either taking Hall or taking JT would sort of be my thought.
And you get later to the first, like you were saying, there is some historical precedent and study for, Mahomes being a viable option there, and more so people coming around to that probably than a few years ago.
Absolutely.
So interesting thought process there, especially in 16 team, just to close out here on Ezra, just that, you elevate teams and the scarcity, especially for premiums and elites at positions like tight end at quarterback. It really does enhance things because, at tight end, just to have a short mention. I mean, let's say you got 2 or 3 guys that on a 12 teamer, that's a quarter of the league. You start going to 16 teams, it's less than 20% of the league. So you start doing the math there, and there's more have-nots when you start. Like I was coaching somebody just this past week, and they're, it's a 2 PPR tight end league, and we talk about that all the time. It's becoming more common having some premium scoring there. FFPC has been doing it for a while at 1.5, but like at 2 PPR, you get into an environment where a tight end flex scores really well, depending on who it is. And the other thing is you actually monopolize the position. So they actually ended up, I think in the first 7 rounds, they took 3 tight ends. The value kept falling to them because they're finding their lineup. You're not just playing keep away. You're playing keep away with their tight end starters in these other teams, but you're also being able to flex them at 2 PPR, and they're scoring really well, even if you're comparing them to wide receiver. So it was a pretty interesting conversation where, again, this is the kind of the fun and the nuance of Dynasty, where you're not going to get quite this level in most redraft formats that are put together or offered, around the sandbox there.
All right, for sure.
Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 142, the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And wanted to mention about the Rookie Draft Guide 2023 edition there for Football Guys, 120 plus profiles. And I've been checking it out. A lot of good work there. They go into ideal fits, strengths, weaknesses. They're going to be updated after the NFL Combine as well. You're going to get the big board cheat sheets, Superflex, 1 quarterback formats. Both of those, you can go over to footballguys.com/rookie guide, and you're going to get a free copy just by signing up at that link. 100% free, that first edition now. You're going to need to be elite or Hall of Fame subscribers over at Football Guys to get all those juicy updates coming post-combine, post-NFL draft. Again, footballguys.com/rookie guide, to get all those updates and start dominating your dynasty league.
Chad, I got to be honest with you. I broke my rule. Today. I started looking over some rookie draft data. So I usually wait until March. I made it to February 21st.
Hold on, Jordan. So are you now currently and officially accepting individual rookie questions?
Still not there yet. That's going to have to be mid-March.
That's going to be mid-March, maybe even April. Because you know what? Honestly, you should wait till April, because April, we have 3 weeks of just lying season and waiting for the draft. Almost nothing going on. There might be a Rogue Pro Day, but pretty much nothing. So we could really populate our time for 3 weeks of just conjecture and comparisons and comps and all of this profiles, landing spots. Someone's going to fall to round 6, all this type of stuff in April, really.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't cram all your
So wait. What spurred this, Jordan? Why did you break the seal here?
If you want the honest answer to that question, is I'm taking a class on learning how to code, and I didn't want to sit there and do it this morning. So I decided that the easiest thing that I could do is download some data and put it in my tracker. So that's what I did. So that's what you got.
Easiest thing you could do.
Okay. Yeah. So that was the thing that used as a distraction. But I will say, again, sort of this is my pitch. We spend from January 1st to April 30th, we'll call it, right? Looking over rookies, that's a third of the year.
I know.
1/3 of the
One
year.
of your biggest pitches is more veterans, less rookies this time of year. That's one of your, that would be on a billboard. Like if you were running for your dynasty president,
Correct.
that would be one of your taglines or mixed into one of them.
Correct. And there might be like 16 guys, like 20 guys that you feel good about in any given class. And then it's like you get to the late second and you're like, this sucks. And it's like, yeah, you spent a third of your year, you spent more than the regular season on this process, and you get to 210 and you feel like you got hit by a train, right? Like that's just like, I don't know. Like it's too much time for me. And again, it's, we've done this, but
can I say what bothers me is that we oscillate. We're on this tidal wave of emotion where depending on the day or what just happened at the combine or free agency or in April or day one or day two, you oscillate between this class is great, this class is horrible, trade all your picks, get them all. Like what are we doing?
Right.
What are we doing? It's so manic in terms of the oscillations here.
Yeah, the class, it goes through a cycle, right? It's always great a year and ahead, right? I keep hearing about how teams should tank for Caleb Williams and
these incoming freshmen. You have no idea, Jordan. 2026 is going to be massive.
But you keep hearing this, and then we do the same thing. We tear it down, right? And then by the time it becomes February next year, we're all disappointed. And then you see a bunch of guys running on television in really tight apparel, and everyone gets all excited. And then we spend all March and April building the class back up, and then all of a sudden it becomes overvalued, right?
Like
it's a cycle.
I love you go to the combine and a wide receiver runs 4.31 and they're like, he's awesome. And then they show the graphic of like, well, the top 10 fastest wide receivers. And you look and it's a bunch of jamokes that have never done anything.
Correct.
And then a running back runs 4.57. They're like, he's horrible. And then they don't show a graphic of how the average starting running back in the NFL has, 4.58 or whatever.
Right.
Like you just, it's hilarious. Anyway.
Yes.
All right. Let's go to some dynasty trades.
And it doesn't change either. It's the same. It's the same. You can recycle the same tweets.
Different day. Exactly. David Montgomery, the thighs of Saquon Barkley, the eyes of LaDainian Tomlinson. Like we're just gonna keep going with this. All right. FFPC one quarterback. We got Mark Andrews on the move. We actually, I think it was last offseason we traded for Mark Andrews in our roster together. It's 1.5, but it is start one there for Mark Andrews. For Jameson Williams, Evan Ingram, Evan Ingram and 107. Jameson Williams, Evan Ingram, 107.
Is this trading $1 for 4 quarters?
3 quarters. But yes.
3 quarters, I guess. I mean, is that really what you're doing here?
FFPC is the format to not do this exact type of trade, right? There's no way around massaging the format to say it's so shallow that you should basically never do this. If you have Mark Andrews and a bunch of bolts, you shouldn't do this.
Right.
If you have 9 actual keepers where you're like, these are worth anything, you still shouldn't do this.
Correct. Yeah.
Evan Ingram's a free agent.
Right. You could pitch me on sort of moving around some of these. But
Jameson Williams has to truly elevate to be the 1B to Amon-Ra St. Brown's 1A.
Correct.
There's no given he ever passes him.
Correct. If you started moving some of these players around, I could be a little bit more interested, right? If instead of Jameson Williams, it's Drake London, and instead of Ingram, it's I don't know, Hawkinson or something like that. That's probably a different conversation. Sure. But I think, and then you might be interested in sort of doing the package side of this. But generally speaking, unless it kind of bowls you over, you want to be on the elite player in this format.
And frankly, if you're on the buying side, you should be trying to do a trade like this every year.
Correct.
You should be looking at the team that doesn't have good enough keepers and say, what 2, 3, 4 things can I put together and get one of their best players?
Right.
Try to do that once a year. That'd be great to do a slide.
You'd find this funny, by the way. Someone asked me, what should I do with Fields? And my response is always the same. I was like, trade him for an elite quarterback. Some very angry person came and was like, that's such terrible advice. Like, you don't even need to be an analyst to say do something like that. And I was like, you know what? That may be true. But you know how many people are still on the sell side of selling elite quarterbacks? Like, it is
Stayed at
amazing.
a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Yeah, it is amazing because you will see so many trades where it's like, Herbert, or it's Allen, or it's Mahomes, right? It's the elite guys at the elite positions, at the premium
Right.
positions, and
And
they're selling
they're
them
gettable.
for
Right.
a roll of dimes, and it's like, what are you
Fields and a
doing?
111.
You're
Yeah.
right. Right. How do you do that? And it's funny to me because I'm like, well, or if someone will say like, hey, I haven't, I can't trade for one of those guys. So it's like, have you tried to overpay? Because
Right.
like the answer is,
Have you tried adding your running back 2 to the offer that got rejected?
right. Someone countered the other day, and they must have known their mark, because they offered me basically the equivalent of like 7 firsts, like for I was trying to acquire Mahomes, and it was like 7 firsts. And I was like, I was like, that's too much. Like it was like a player from every position, and like a first this year and a first next year. I was like, that's too much. But generally speaking, that's not, you could pay over what the market would say, and it's still a discount, right? Because 101 is too cheap.
One quarterback, half PPR. You mentioned Garrett Wilson a minute ago. He has been traded for Tyreek Hill, the rare 1-versus-1 same position deal.
This is interesting. Can we do a second on Garrett Wilson? Where does he rank in your wide receivers from 2022?
Oh, just
your
within
rookie
the
wide
rookies?
receivers. Yeah.
All right. I'll have to pull it up here. But yeah, this is the classic. And this is what's, going back to our first conversation, this is what makes Dynasty fun, right? You trade the older guy that has been hyper productive for the younger guy that you hope becomes productive enough that when Tyreek Hill is not productive, that Garrett Wilson's still going on, or can he hang over the next couple of years close enough production wise that it makes it a debatable short-term point as well.
Right.
All right. So the back to what you said. So the Garrett Wilson, I have him of the rookies from last year. They're all on the same overall tier, which again, tiers are great for Dynasty rankings. I got Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Drake London all in the same tier. My official ordering is Olave, Wilson, London.
Okay.
But they are all hyper close.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I would put Wilson. I would put Olave ahead of him. I think that one's clear to me. I think I'd probably put London ahead of him as well, for some reasons. We've actually talked about this on a prior show. So if this is sounding familiar, we have done this one before. If this was Olave, I'd be a little bit more interested in that side. I just love wide receivers that can truly make a difference, and there's not that many of them. And
one of them has the nickname Cheetah. I would just make literally people can't touch him. And it doesn't seem like at 31 he's gonna doesn't he strike you as like a Deshaun Jackson plus player?
Yes.
Deshaun Jackson was still hovering around relevancy, bouncing around teams well into his 30s.
Right.
And he has been far more of a nomadic guy than Tyreek Hill has been to this point. Like that, Deshaun Jackson had some, I don't know if we want our team to have him type guy. Like Tyreek Hill has really none of that in terms of washing his way off of teams and things like that. And again, I mean, he's done it with a variety of quarterbacks. He's done it with Mahomes, obviously, but he also did it with, Tua and ancillary Miami quarterbacks this past year. He's changed teams and he's pretty rare. So that I still have him over. I think again, same tier 3 to me is pretty big in Dynasty wide receiver land. But I recently traded for Tyreek Hill. He's a auto start, can put up 200 yards and 2 touchdowns type player. And there's plenty of guys that are nice young players that they will never have that. They can be nice and you pat them on your head, very good job, but they just don't have that.
Right.
1 or 2 years of that. Even if there is a decline, I mean, Tyreek Hill, we're talking about a guy that he's 6 years in a row, top 10. 6.
It's a lot of years.
With big peaks in there. He's basically Mike Evans with more ceiling. I mean, right? I mean, Mike Evans, what's the thing? They don't like consistency, year over year, just plug and play, quality production, put them in your lineup. People like ceiling, but yeah, we're seeing a discount now on Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
It's interesting. He has ceiling too.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. And you typically, what do we always say to GMs that are making deals like this, or you see offers of straight up, someone give a pick, someone do something, right? I mean,
make it a 2-for-2 and make it a roster construction trade.
Did it start out Tyreek Hill for Garrett Wilson in a third, and then they're like, drop the pick? And then I mean, if someone just proposed this and they're like, both people liked it, it's pretty rare in Dynasty for this to occur.
Correct. Especially intro position. Right? Especially
also, I would say
within
half
the 10
PPR. We didn't mention this, but the format, half PPR, Tyreek Hill. I mean, let's face it. Taking an 80-yarder to the house is
Yes.
better in non PPR and better than in half PPR than it is one or even bigger premiums.
Yes.
All right, last one here. We got 14-team Superflex. Tony Pollard, 413, and a 24 fourth ancillary stuff for a 24 first. So 14-team are essentially Pollard for a future first.
This is the mythical thing, right? People have told me this happens. It's like Bigfoot. Like I people have talked about Pollard for a future first, like since he was drafted. And I was like, I have him, and I can't get it. This is a clear one to me. I will not trade a future first for a player unless it's a top 30 asset. Pollard doesn't qualify. Give me the first. That's a simple calculus for me.
I would not on a boat. I would not if it could float. I do not like green eggs and ham. I would not trade Tony Pollard to get Tony Pollard for a first.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's so many things with Tony Pollard that are pretty fascinating. Like you just said, the fact that you're not able to he's in the top 15 to 20 of dynasty running backs, and yet the first seems like a unicorn type thing that you're just grasping. Like, does it really exist? And it's the same sort of thing where you're like, oh, people trade Justin Herbert for 2 or 3 quarter type things. And so people do it. You just may not see it repetitively in your specific situation, but it does happen. And Tony Pollard going for a first, this just shows does happen. He's 26. I wanted to ask you, Jordan, if you were putting a percentage, Tony Pollard on the Dallas Cowboys in 2023 week 1, what percentage is that?
I think it's pretty high because I think they're going to be, I think they're kind of invested in him, and I think that they're going to they're going to then overpay, right, to sort of justify their, right. We've seen them kind of do that thing. So he strikes me as a guy that, Eckler's been like the lone, and maybe even Nick Chubb to a degree, but it's really Eckler that has been the almost a lone guy on a second deal that has like really been able to overperform his cost. And Pollard is like in the shouting, in the same sort of sphere where he could catch all those balls and sort of do that, the sort of the Eckler role on a second deal. And you see some comps between the two of them contract wise, right? So I'm wondering if that's going to boost him in value. I just wonder how robust the market is going to be, especially in a good class, right? So I think I would say it's a pretty high chance that he's back in Dallas would be kind of my take there.
Okay. That if I was a Pollard, team for Dynasty, I would say that would be the rooting interest. You want Pollard to go back there. There's talk that Zeke is going to be back. There's not a whole lot of interest, and that this continuation of Pollard either taking over or just maintaining what made him a stronger fantasy producer this past year, that we would see a similar iteration, if not maybe more slanted towards Pollard in some optimal settings. Maybe he gets a little more in terms of touchdown opportunities and maybe not from distance. But what I would remind folks is 26 years old. I think he's a young 26 in the sense that a lot of people would guess maybe 24, 25. He hasn't been truly on the landscape. It doesn't seem like it for that long. And so a 26-year-old, you're paying a first for a guy that really has done it to one seasonal degree. And that is a little bit of a leap at this point in time. He's never truly been a workhorse. Even last year, it didn't really feel like he was taking over the offense really at any point in time and for any long duration. Go all the way back to college. He almost had a Antonio Gibson type, same school, Memphis, but same thing, going through college, not being a workhorse back. And that's a little concerning. When you get to your mid-20s, you're still kind of waiting around. So is that affected with the durability standpoint? You can say a lot of things about Zeke, but since 18 years old, workhorse guy. Yep. So he might be grinding down. It's been a decade later. But again, Pollard almost has that still needing to prove it kind of fashion to get all the way home and maybe have that monster season that we see from the workhorses feature backs that are a dying breed in the NFL. So yeah, same sort of thing here. I mean, I have a lot of pause, of giving up the future first for that specific. Again, take away the Pollard name, but a lot of the little bullet points I outlined, That's concerning. Now, whether that, if that profile was somebody else, same sort of thing applies. If Pollard goes back, he has a quality season, that's a later first, it can work out. But if a Pollard injury, if he ends up going somewhere else, maybe it's more of a committee. There's a lot of risk in selling that pick now. And you allude to this all the time that, you trade that future first and you're trading it in February for a guy that frankly, you want him to be healthy in November and December, and you're a long way off from that. And you don't even know what team he's playing on. So this is different than selling for a cornerstone quarterback with a lot more solidity to his profile and a longer term lens.
Yeah, you should be, if you want to trade that pick right now, you should be doing it for an elite quarterback, right? I mean, that's totally the thing. All right. So I do want to sort of shout out, we talked about this in a prior show. My Analytics Dynasty team building guide is out. You can get the promo code FBG. Go to analyticsdynasty.com/product/guide. It's in the show notes. It is in the YouTube link. All the key metrics on building dynasty teams more effectively, more efficiently. Case studies in there as well. If you're newer to dynasty, it'll help you sort of think, apply some of these decisions as well. And my favorite thing probably I've ever written is a one-page chart, right? And we talked about one of them. Don't trade a future first for anything less than a top 30 asset, right? Stuff like that that's on there that helps you make really easy decisions. You can go ahead, pick it up, analyticsdynasty.com/product/guide, and 10% off if you use the promo code FBG.
Excellent. Yeah. And we talked earlier in the show about, starting in dynasty, but whether you're beginning, mid-career, or later in your dynasty lifeline there's always things to learn, and you should be looking to learn every single year. The off season is always a great point where the live fire is not going in season, those weekly machinations with your teams and with all that's going on NFL wise in your own fantasy league. It can be tough to really do that self-analysis and sort of, where do I need to grow? Where do I need to improve? And what do I need to learn? But you definitely have that time to stretch your arms in the off season to do those things. Got a few dynasty quotes from the Football Guys forum this week. A big macro one here, which is mentions that their biggest pet peeve in fantasy these days is the search for the holy grail. And that's the bell cow running back like Eddie George, Emmitt Smith, back in the dark ages. There's just not going to be many of these guys anymore. And when you find one not named Derrick Henry, they probably won't last long, which is why I would flip them pretty quickly before they hit a cliff.
There's a lot there. I think you got to be careful on an age basis, right? I think you got to be smart and sort of how to invest in them. But this is the reason why we do it in rookie drafts, right? The stakes are relatively low. If you do it right, lots of late first into the second round, sort of drafting them in volume. And they tend to be good bets there historically. And you draft a lot of them and they can really pay off, right? And you might not necessarily pay off to the extent of like an Eddie George paying off, years and years and years. But if you pay off for a half of a season, right, that can be very impactful, right? Thinking about guys like Ramondre Stevenson. You might not even feel confident Ramondre Stevenson, if he lasts 3 months, the next 3 months safe on the Patriots depth chart, but he has been massively impactful like that last year, right? He has been very impactful in his time as a starter, right? Then you can reevaluate, use some of the tools that we talk about, right? Your threat rates, right? Your survival rates, all that stuff to make those decisions going forward. But be in the business of doing it a lot at cheap costs, and the odds of hitting add up. And again, it doesn't require you to hit on one specific guy. You can use a lot of committee type stuff, right? You can use a lot of, running back becomes a game where it's, you don't need to start in September. You don't need to pick someone that's going to start 14 weeks for you. You need to each week pick someone. Each of those 14 weeks, you need to pick a different person, or you can pick a different person. And so those advantages can really add up if you're optimizing your team.
Yeah. And I would say also, obviously a 28-year-old Derrick Henry looks a little different than, if you were looking at a 24-year-old Ezekiel Elliott or Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey. You look at these types, or Leonard Fournette 2 or 3 years into his career, you have these opportunities. Nick Chubb. I mean, when they show you where they have pedigree and they also have a workhorse profile, they usually last. I mean, they are actually year over year outstanding of the injury. risk. And I think what's also interesting is wide receivers get hurt too. Tight ends get hurt too. Quarterbacks, we're seeing them go down in droves, even though the NFL tries to protect them every which way from Sunday. So again, to assume that it's running back attrition is the only one we're seeing, it's not true. I think it's just the most graphic because you're seeing a first round redraft pick go down. And it's like, well, that killed my season. In Dynasty, there's a lot of ways around that. I mean, I had plenty of years and teams where you had Christian McCaffrey and he played 4 games for you that year. It was like 2 early, 1 in the middle of the year, and he came back for 1 more. But you can survive that. You can outlast that. You can have players that sub in for McCaffrey. And if you happen to get McCaffrey back in December, you're good to go. But it's a puzzle piece. We talk about that all the time. So these profiles, it can get dicey at 27, 28, 29 years old. Who's going to fall off? Who's going to maintain? But their price falls too. I mean, we're seeing, didn't I see, please correct this, but I thought it was something in the vein of like Alvin Kamara around 10 of a startup draft or 11 or 12. I mean, fading to running back 27 or some ridiculous point. And so you're mitigating the risk when he falls to that point. We're not talking about drafting him at 30 overall at 27 years old. The price generally falls so that it's a far more palatable. And again, efficient market, and the market of a startup draft or the market of trading, not a lot of people are trading 104 for Alvin Kamara right now. You can probably trade a late first, early second, maybe. So that's where, again, the age comes in. The more durable guys at 23, 24 years old, they're going to cost more, but really their multi-year lens is pretty good. And you mentioned rookie drafts. You get these rookies that come in terms of like wins over replacement, quality starts, predictable starts, all this stuff. Running back greater than wide receiver typically early on. And especially if you're not looking at like a 5-year entire rookie contract lens, you're looking at 2 years, which how long are you holding your 205 rookie pick? Let's be honest. If you were to look at all 10 of your dynasty leagues from 2 years ago, how many of your second round rookie picks do you still have? Whether it's a drop or a trade, I mean, you have so many opportunities to move a player with someone else interested or you just involving them in a package. So again, I think a lot of people use a little too long of a lens when looking at drafting within a rookie draft because a lot of things happen over the course of 24 months. And yet we kind of look out and be like, I want that 21-year-old wide receiver because I'm going to have them for 9 years. I had a startup draft in 2010 or 11. And I remember I believe it was Demaryius Thomas made it. I can't remember, or is Julio Jones or something. But the point is, I had 1 or 2 guys on the entire team make it more than 5 years.
Right.
And I think one was Russell Wilson or something. And then one was one of those wide receivers. But it's just like you really overstate how much of your team stays static for X amount of time. Yeah. Would be one of my biggest takeaways.
The only league that you and I are in and that we play against each other in is a league that I believe I drafted in 2015. And I drafted, I believe it was Mike Evans and Brandon Cooks, my first 2 picks, and I still have them, right? But that is that's incredible.
And they were second-year players at that time, a 2014 class. I remember that. So, but yeah, and those are so wildly, consistent players, just in terms of staying on the radar, till age 30 now, pretty much till and they came in at 21 years old. But yeah, I think people projecting too far, and using that as a huge basis point for age is another big mistake. I don't know about you, Jordan, I keep kind of creeping down, like at some positions of like this whole like wide receiver longevity thing and greater than running back, I think is one of those black boxes that people kind of overstate. And the risk that people put onto some running back where they're like, they're going to lose their job. They may never have a job. That's okay. Your wide receiver may never have a job either. Like, let's be fair. If you're a wide receiver 3 for a bad offense, what job is that?
Right.
Great. You're on the field for 50% of targets, for 50% of snaps. Right. What does that mean? You can see them not get the ball? Is that what you want to see? Like,
yeah, right. Exactly. And the other thing I would like, when you look at that, the problem with that too is that people sort of overestimate wide receivers' ability to take the leap, right? We'll call it the George Pickens problem.
Wide receiver 50 to wide receiver 10.
Correct.
How do you make the leap?
And everyone wants to project them, and what we realize is like we're really let down.
Have you looked at that? Like what you literally just said, taking a leap like from year 1 or year 2 to the big time the next year. I bet it's pretty low.
I've been surprised that like when you look at the like some of the metrics like yards per route run, targets per route run, so like sort of those types of things, the jump from year 1 to year 2 isn't as big as you would expect it to be. Like it's not.
You want to know
It's
why? You want to
only
know
a
why,
couple
Jordan?
percent.
Do
Why is
you want to
that?
know why?
Why?
Because if you don't unequivocally prove to your NFL team, I am the captain now. If you don't say that for a cross section of the year or
Mhm.
whatever, the NFL team either A has a new coaching staff, B has a new GM, but C at a minimum, they have the time to evaluate and get free agents and new draft picks, new toys to replace or supersede you. That's it.
It's fair.
You may be their best option or one of their best options November 12th. But when it gets to February and they go, we can do better. What if we
Right.
get that guy? What if we trade for AJ Brown? What if we draft this shiny guy in the first round? And plenty of teams, what, 4, 5, 6 teams a year draft that guy in the first round, right?
Yep.
And a
Yep.
few teams, I mean, it's not a great free agent class, but we're going to see some trades.
Hopefully.
Someone's going to sign Jacoby Myers. I mean,
Yeah.
the point is, we're spreading this out. That's a quarter of the league or more, probably. Just jumbling up those dice.
Yep.
So, are you safe? Are you safe? Not as many are safe as you think.
Unless you're in Green Bay and when they would just refuse to address the position. Right?
Yeah.
Besides that, like it's you're not very safe. No, you're not very safe.
You're safe in New England too, because they draft guys and they end up not.
Right. There's no chance the
mattering,
guys
so.
that they draft are good enough to supersede
Right.
you.
Taylor Price. Mic drop. All right. Next one. I sort of reverse scout running backs, which is to say I focus on pass catching ability first, running ability second.
Yeah, I mean that's not a bad place to go. I mean,
Worst case, you get Kenny Gainwell, right?
the receiving centric aspect of it, right? You're getting more points per target, right? Those are more valuable than your particular carries are, right? So you're going to get less of them, but I do think that's a way to carve it out. But it depends what you're trying to accomplish, right? It's going to be really hard to hit a huge ceiling if your guy can't do both, right? So if you're thinking about drafting a guy in the first round, right? Anything less than a catch per game in college, that has been a very rare first round profile, right? So I think it's happened twice. Ray Rice and then someone relatively Ronald Jones. Might have been someone even more recent than that. It's been like 2 or 3 times. So that's pretty uncommon. Kenneth Walker, I think, was the other one. So it's been pretty uncommon historically for that to happen, right? So you just kind of have to balance it, right? How does the guy stand on the field? How does the guy score you points, right? They're going to look different. But sort of be mindful of that. And I do think the receiving viability thing, it keeps a lot of guys in play that might not otherwise be in play.
Yeah, Ray Rice, when you go back and look at how he's being used at Rutgers, and then you see how he was being used as a receiving and all-around dynamo in the NFL, pretty mind-blowing because he was literally that offense of just run.
Yeah.
And and
they had Brian Leonard on that Rutgers team, right?
Right.
And then Ray Rice had like 2 catches a game as a senior, but it was like he didn't have any because Brian Leonard ran all the routes. Right? Yeah.
And I would say I have a mantra. So we're going to stay with Jordan's policy there. So we're not going to talk individual rookies, but I would say this, that my mantra for running backs is big backs who can move and can catch. And notice what I didn't say. You can almost forgive them a little bit for some of their rushing production. And this would apply to 2 guys that have hit in a good way when you look at what their rookie capital was versus where they got to at their peak in Dynasty, which is David Johnson was the first guy that I outlined. I think it was 2015. And then Antonio Gibson, 2 guys that were big backs who can move and can catch. Gibson played wide receiver, for goodness sake, at Memphis. So you get enough size. You get a guy that has good enough athleticism, and they're gonna fall their way forward and know enough about running with the ball in their hands to figure it out. But if they can catch at good size with good athleticism, though, that combination is harder to find. So that's always an underrated running back profile coming into the NFL if you can find it on the cheap. And those guys are pretty good historical examples to continue that trend. Last one. How are there still Sky Moore believers out there?
We talked about some of the metrics from the team building guide to give you success arcs and stuff like that. He's behind them. Right? He's not on a positive track for his pedigree. just the route participation stuff is concerning, right? That stuff, you bring in Kadarius Toney, plays over him, right? Justin Watson's playing over him, right? That stuff isn't a great sign
Bound to
typically.
add somebody this offseason, right? I mean,
Right,
if Juju's gone, Hardman's gone, Justin Watson played a ton,
right,
or more than people thought. He's gone. They're going to do something. See, this is the
right.
thing: time, right? Given the option of time, Chiefs are going to do something in the passing game.
If you can get what you paid for Sky Moore, take it immediately.
Well, some people
Right.
played like a mid first.
Well,
So
that might not happen.
but
That depends on
yeah,
the class ages, right? Things
late
could get better.
first, shine it up, put it together, right? Add him to a deal to get like at the end, right? You add a running back, you add Sky Moore to a deal, end up getting a big time quarterback or
Yep.
getting a stud tight end. Just like, I'll throw in Sky Moore.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's a good lesson. Don't take huge bets on outlier pedigree things in a rookie draft, right? You should never spend on this year's Sky Moore, on next year's Sky Moore, on day 2 guys that are situational landing spots. You should never spend a mid first on them. That's a terrible bet, right? So you would much rather wait on those, right? Because then again, what did I just say? Like, you want to get back what you paid for them. You can generally do that at wide receiver as long as you don't pay a ton, right? So can you get back a early second for a guy like Sky Moore at some point over the next couple of months? I think you probably can figure out a way to do that, but it's a lot harder when you're like, all right, I want to reach on him and take him at 105, right? That's a disaster because it becomes you're really sharpshooting. So yeah, I think that's a good lesson to sort of take from that experience.
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to make the pitch for Sky Moore at where he was going last year. Generally, the median or slightly higher than, and bullish versus the market last year,
Yep.
without using the phrase, well, he landed with the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. He's got to hit because he's an adequate enough player, and look where he landed. It was really hard to make the pitch on him siloed as a prospect. What do you think of him? And he validates going in X position of a rookie draft. It was really hard. Like, everything in my power said, like, he's going to be overdrafted by the market, and he is being overdrafted by the market. And it's just kind of interesting to see the fact that there actually was no, in August, I was doing, you're looking for cheap wide receiver ones. And it was like, well, whoever Kansas City is the historical, like, as long as they can survive there and thrive with Kelsey also there, who was always the wide receiver one. But the answer actually ended up being nobody, which I think is interesting. They ran a lot of 2 tight end sets. They ran the ball. Jerick McKinnon for 6 weeks or whatever was basically like a wide receiver one in that passing game. And so Juju Smith-Schuster was out, in the 30s or whatever. You had some moments from everybody. They acquired Kadarius Toney. Like, it was just really interesting to see a wide receiver by committee, and yet with a diabolically good quarterback. And so there really was no giant splash. Juju was the right answer oracle, or Sky Moore was a year 1 impact player. Like, we really didn't get any right answer, which is historically pretty rare when you start looking at situation versus wide receiver result.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Busy show. Instructive trades. Thanks to Ezra again. If you have a macro question, you can always reach out to us at footballguys.com. You can find us. What's the static address for our email addresses? Isn't it always our last name at footballguys.com? I always forget.
I
believe pretty much it?
That is true. I'm McNamara at footballguys.com, and you're Parsons at footballguys.com.
All right, there you go. So, yeah, so if you want to reach out to the show via email, it's always something, if you listen to this show on a Wednesday, Thursday, and you're like, I got a question, because, the chat moves pretty fast, the live show here. But if you got a macro question, this is certainly the time frame to do that if it's NFL free agency or team building or any of that stuff. Really great stuff. So we talked about Tony Pollard, future
and we
first.
Do check it, by the way. That it comes right to our regular.
It comes
email
right to us. Yeah, it forwards right along.
Yes,
so
yes.
Be nice, and you'll get a response, of course. And again, always might earmark it for the show the following week. Talked about best player available in terms of the FFPC there, Mark Andrews. Straight across the same position trading, Tony Pollard. Some good discussion there. And of course, beginning, new, or just learning in Dynasty as the macro topic at the top of the show this week. I'm Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Dynasty.